Peace and blessings, beloved. It's your sis, Aisha Rahman. Welcome back to my channel. If it is your first time here, welcome to my channel. I am Aisha Rahman, also known as Aisha Leone here on the internet. I am a library science and information technology student, currently working on my master's degree in library science, archives, museums, that type of thing. Here on my channel, I talk a lot about genealogy, genetic genealogy and DNA, African ancestry, as well as my personal travels and my personal genealogy journey. In today's video, I'm going to kind of give you a run through of some of the questions that we can interview and ask our family members as we are doing our genealogy research. So one of the things that's very important for me to remember is one day I'm going to be an ancestor, and there are some questions that I wish I would have had the chance to ask some of my ancestors while they were still here. So I have 3 or 4 people in my family that are getting up in age. They're in their 80s, and these are some of the questions that I would like to ask them before they pass away. So the first question that I always want to make sure that I ask people is it okay for me to record this? Can I take notes? If I'm audio recording or video recording, I want to make sure that they're aware of it. I don't want to do anything behind anybody's back. So I always want to ask them ahead of time, before even when I schedule it, hey, I'm working on this project, I want to preserve our family history. Is it okay if I record it? Can I take video? Can I take audio? Or can I do notes? Most people don't really like to be on camera, so they might be okay with audio. It might make them feel a lot more comfortable, or just taking notes and writing it down. So the next thing that I ask is, what do you think about family history and knowing about your story and our family roots? So I kind of gauge and kind of warm the person up and kind of get a feel for how they're going to respond to my future questions by asking them, well, what do you think about family history? Do you think it's important that we know our roots? Do you think that this thing that I'm working on is important? Are you a private person? Do you think it's just doesn't really matter? You're going to get a lot of diverse responses from your family members. Some people are just going to do it because they want to support you. Others wish that they would have done the same. They just don't have the time, or they don't know where to start. The next question is, what is the one thing that you want people to know about you? So for me, I'm all about legacy. There's something specific that I want people to know about me when I leave this earth, and I want to give my family member an opportunity to share that. It's going to be their story. I want them to be comfortable with knowing that someone wants to share how they want it to be remembered in the first place. My objective is not to be intrusive or to get all in their business. It's really just to learn more about who we are as a family and where we came from in general. And just my foot, sitting on my foot, very uncomfortable. The next thing I want to ask is, what is something that might be surprising for people to learn about you? I actually got this question from a couple of groups that I'm in. It's just a general question. It's kind of like an icebreaker question that people might ask often. And I find that you get a lot of very interesting responses. So for me, for example, I'm a certified scuba diver. Not a lot of people know about that. I can read and write Arabic. My vocabulary is small, so I won't say I'm fluent, but I guess I speak Arabic. Same with French and Spanish. And I guess you could say the same with Creole. I'm not fluent in those languages, but I can read and write it. And if I'm listening to a conversation, I can understand it. So pretty good with languages. And there's many more languages that I want to learn. But not a lot of people know about that. I've been to the continent. I have my citizenship from Sierra Leone. Of course, those are things that people know now, but some of my family members probably don't know that. The next thing is I just dive in with the personal stuff. What date were you born? What city and state? Were you born at a hospital or at home? So depending on the age of the person you're interviewing, they may not have been born at home or at a hospital. For example, my grandmother was born at home. My grandmother's sister actually helped my grandmother, her sister, give birth to her baby. So my grandparents, on my mom's side, I don't know about my dad's side, were born at home. What does your name mean and where did it come from? This is important if you notice that there's a pattern in your family name. I have an uncle named Charles. He has a brother named Charles. He has a father named Charles, and his brother's name was Charles. So Charles is a name that's consistently used, and then he named My grandfather named his son Charles. So Charles is a name that is consistently used throughout my family history. And I can see this pattern, but I don't know where the name originally came from. But he may say, oh, hey, I have this name and I got this name from my brother, or I got this name from my father and he got it from his father. For example, I've always wondered, where did my name Ladon come from? It's my middle name. I gave my middle name to my daughter, and my granddaughter have it, and my grandmother has Ladon as a middle name. So I've always just wondered, where does this name come from? I've not seen it in my research from anybody before my grandmother, so I have no idea where this name came from. It could just be something that my great grandmother made up. The next question that I like to ask is, what is your earliest childhood memory? Some people will say start from current and ask people about how they got to where they are now because it's easier to remember. And then some people will say start from the beginning. I like to start from the beginning because you kind of get a flow, and it's okay if they don't remember from way, way back when. I don't say, what was it like from age 5? I just ask, what was your earliest childhood memory? So for me, sometimes I have memories, but I don't really know how old I was at that time. So I will guess and be like, oh, I think I was around 7 or 8 because I lived in this place. So I always ask, what was your earliest childhood memory? The other thing you can ask is, what did you want to be when you grow up? I think it's a really good idea because you will see patterns, you will see things that they did versus where they are now, and kind of get an understanding of the person's life and what they went through and how they have become who they are now. So for example, my grandmother, I found a notebook of hers where she just kept track of bills and things like that. But I seen on one of the pages, she had business ideas. I had no idea that my grandmother was interested in business or entrepreneur minded. So that was very interesting to learn and to see she had business ideas that she would write down from time to time. Because growing up, I just knew she worked in electronics with my dad at Intel doing computers. So to know that maybe I have my entrepreneur spirit from my grandmother, it makes me feel really good to know that that might be where it came from. The next thing that you can ask is, what is your job now and how did it come to be? Sometimes our ancestors got the jobs that they had on purpose, but oftentimes it was just, this is what I did, or this is what my father did, or this is what I was trained in, this was the skill. Somebody told me, hey, you're good at this, to do this thing. So always try and ask, how did you come into the job you're in now? And do you like that work? Do you really enjoy that job? So my dad, growing up, I felt like was a workaholic. He worked a lot. And I always wondered, did he really like his job or was he just doing it to provide? And come to find out, after I asked, my dad actually really loved the work that he did. And I had no idea. I thought, oh, he's just doing this job to make money, to pay bills, to put food on the table. But he actually loved the work that he did. And that makes me feel really good that he was spending so much time and so much effort and so many years, but actually doing something that he really enjoyed. The next thing that you can ask is, let's see, where am I at? How did you come to live in the city or state that you are currently in? There was the big migration. A lot of us have family members that moved, or you have family that just stayed within their state, but maybe they lived in the city. So for example, my family, some of them came from Maryland, some of them came from Virginia and ended up here in California. So I had to ask, how did we get here in California? Why did we come all the way here? I have family from New Orleans that ended up here in California. So I've asked, how did we come here? What was it in California? What did we come here for? The other question that you can ask is, who are your siblings? How many are there and what are their names? I have my grandfather has passed, but they have siblings that have passed before them, siblings that passed away when they were younger that I didn't know. So there are siblings that they have that I may not have been aware of that they even had. Or even, what are the ages of the people that you're interviewing? Are they a middle child? Are they the older child? Or are they the youngest child? The next questions I like to ask, of course, is, who are your mother and father? Do you remember where they were born and when? What do you remember about them and their life and their hobbies? So these are the questions if you don't have these people that are living with you anymore, if your grandparents or your great-grandparents have already passed, you can maybe ask someone, you can ask an aunt or uncle, you can ask your parents, do they remember who their parents were, or even who their grandparents were? So that's the next question is, do you remember your grandparents? Then, of course, I always like to ask, What are the stories that you've been told growing up? What are some stories that the family has said, like, oh, this is the family story, or this is the family secret, or this is, you're going to get some very interesting stories. So, for example, there's a lot of spiritual stuff that has taken place in my family. I have stories of my great grandfather passed away and someone took his death certificate all the way from Maryland to California, and then woke up the next day and the death certificate's gone and it's back in Maryland. I've gotten stories like that from my family members. So some kind of way, this death certificate went back and forth across the entire country without anybody physically moving it. It was sent, I guess, via mail, or it was brought the first time physically and ended up some kind of way back in Maryland. These are the type of stories that I hear. They're interesting to me. So you might get some similar stories, or even more dramatic stories that you hear from your family. And of course, we got Indian in us family. We have an ancestor that's Native American from the Cherokee or the Choctaw. Sometimes there's truth to that. Most times it's not. Oftentimes we were actually enslaved by the Choctaw and the Cherokee people that we have listed on our Dawes rolls. You're not going to really know for sure 100% unless you do DNA testing. So my DNA testing, I have no Native American in me. My mother has no Native American in her that shows, but my mother's uncle, her father's brother, has 1 or 2% Native American in him. And Ancestry updates its database, so you can wake up one day and that could be gone. The next question that I like to ask is, what was it like growing up in blank, that city or state? So I could ask, what was it like growing up in New Orleans? What was it like growing up in Maryland? Who did you hang out with? Who did you play with? What were some places that you liked to go? What school did you go to? What was the highest education level that you reached? What were some of the classes that you liked? And what was your teachers' names? If you can remember this information, they're really good. So these are some questions that you can ask maybe some people in your family that are a little bit younger. I don't think that my great uncle that's in his 80s is going to remember a teacher or his favorite class. But if it's his favorite teacher, perchance he might remember because it may have stuck out that much because he really had a great memory to share at that time in his life. The next few questions I have are, what are some of your favorite home cooked meals? So not going out to eat, but some of your favorite home cooked meals. I think these are very interesting because there are recipes that I've gotten from my family that I try and pass on to my children. And these are our home cooked meals and specific ways that we cook them. So one of the things that I wish I would have known is to get my grandmother's recipe on how she made her greens and how she made her cabbage. Because the way that my mom makes it is different the way that my aunt makes it, and they're sisters. So where did their recipes come from? Now I'm making my own recipe, and so I'm trying to combine and make sure that I pass on my recipe to my daughter, who can pass on to her kids. Or my sons. They might like cooking too. The next question that I have is English the only language that was spoken at home? Are there any other languages that we spoke or that your family spoke growing up? So I am convinced that my grandfather's father, my great grandfather, was speaking Creole. I remember him from when I was younger, and he would speak really fast, but he had this funny accent. And I always thought, oh, maybe it's just because they're from New Orleans. But now going to Sierra Leone and hearing people speak Creole, I have a feeling that my papa was speaking Creole. The next question that I have is, what was a popular song that you sang growing up? I think this is very important because sometimes songs are passed down from generation to generation. Songs, especially if you're in the church or if you're Muslim and you learn nasheeds, they're passed down from generation to generation. So there might be songs that I learned that I teach my kids, that I got from my parents, that got from their parents. So knowing maybe some popular songs is a very good question to ask. There's also, what church or mosque did you go to? Who was your pastor or imam? So for example, my uncle is the pastor at his church, and I believe his father was also a pastor. There's several pastors on that side of my family, going all the way back to the first AME church that was established in New Orleans, was actually from my ancestor after he was brought from Washington, D.C. and sold by Georgetown University and ended up in New Orleans. You aren't going to know these things unless you ask questions. And it's like little breadcrumbs, and you just have to follow where those breadcrumbs lead you to learn really great information about your family and your family history. It's very empowering. It's very healing to know so much about our family other than we were brought here as slaves. We have a history that began way before that. We have a history that's going to continue after that. Finally, the questions that I have is, did you ever talk about slavery or where we came from in Africa? As well as, have you ever thought about it yourself? So there may be some conversations that your family members may have had, like, oh, I heard we were from here, or we had this family member that was from there. But then you oftentimes have family members who they just don't talk about it. They don't bring it up at all. That is actually very, very common. So that's it, guys. Those are some of the questions that I have that you can ask your ancestors. Leave a comment below if there's something that you think I left out. I'm going to create a worksheet and pass this out so that you guys can download it. And I want to make sure that I include your suggestions in the worksheet as we update it. Life is good. Have a blessed day.